I never imagined that one day I would find myself in a situation so tangled, so overwhelming, that it would leave me questioning my very sense of right and wrong. But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? And sometimes, the surprises are nothing short of nightmares. It all began when I married the love of my life, Ethan. He was kind, gentle, and everything I had ever dreamed of in a partner. But as the saying goes, when you marry someone, you also marry their family. Ethan's father, Richard, was an imposing figure. He was charming and authoritative, the kind of man who could silence a room with just his presence. At first, I admired him, but that admiration turned into something far more sinister as time went on. From the moment Ethan and I moved into his family's estate, a temporary arrangement he had promised, Richard's eyes seemed to linger on me just a little too long. His compliments, though subtle at first, began to feel inappropriate. "You're far too beautiful for my son," he once said with a smirk. I laughed it off, chalking it up to his peculiar sense of humor. But deep down, it made me uneasy. One evening, Ethan was out late for work. I was alone in the house when Richard found me in the library. His gaze was intense, his voice low as he commented on how lonely I must feel with Ethan's long hours. I tried to deflect, making it clear that I was fine, but he didn't stop. "You deserve attention, you know," he said. Stepping closer, I felt cornered, trapped. I told myself I was overreacting, that he was just being friendly. But the way his hand brushed against mine as he handed me a book told me otherwise. I left the room that night feeling a knot of unease in my stomach, but I couldn't bring myself to tell Ethan. How could I accuse his father of something so sinister without concrete proof? Weeks turned into months, and Richard's advances became more blatant. One afternoon, while Ethan was out with friends, Richard found me in the garden. His compliments turned into veiled propositions. "A woman like you shouldn't have to wait for affection," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation. I froze, unable to respond. I wanted to scream, to push him away, but fear held me back. Fear of what he might do. Fear of what Ethan might think. The turning point came on a stormy night. Ethan was away on a business trip, and the house felt eerily quiet. Richard knocked on my bedroom door, claiming he needed to discuss something urgent. I hesitated but eventually let him in. That was my first mistake. He sat down, his demeanor deceptively calm. "You're a smart woman," he began. "You must know how much I admire you." My heart raced as I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but he was relentless. "Ethan doesn't deserve you. He can't make you happy the way I can." I stood up, intending to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. His grip was firm, his eyes burning with an intensity that terrified me. "You're not going anywhere," he said. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that pinned me to the spot. "This is wrong," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "You're my father-in-law." But he dismissed my protests with a wave of his hand. "Who's going to believe you?" he sneered. "Ethan? He worships me. You'll only destroy your marriage if you say anything." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. Or at least he made me believe he was. The power dynamics were so skewed, the stakes so high, that I felt paralyzed. And in that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me forever. I stayed silent. The weeks that followed were a blur of guilt and shame. I avoided Richard as much as I could, but it was impossible to escape him entirely. Every interaction felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. I became withdrawn. My once loving relationship with Ethan strained under the weight of the secret I carried. One day, Ethan confronted me. "What's wrong?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. "You've been so distant lately." I wanted to tell him everything, to unburden myself, but the fear of losing him kept me silent. "I'm just stressed," I lied. "It's nothing to worry about." But it was something to worry about. Richard's behavior escalated, his advances more aggressive. He cornered me in the hallway one evening, his intentions unmistakable. This time I pushed back, mustering all the courage I could find. "If you don't stop, I'll tell Ethan," I threatened. He laughed, a cold, menacing sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Go ahead," he said. "But remember, I'll deny everything. And who do you think he'll believe? His loving father or his wife who's been acting so strangely?" His words felt like a trap closing around me. I was caught in a web of manipulation and deceit, unable to see a way out. The stress began to take a toll on me, both physically and emotionally. I lost weight, my sleep plagued by nightmares. Ethan noticed but seemed at a loss for how to help. One fateful night, everything came to a head. Richard's advances turned into outright demands, his threats more explicit. "If you don't give me what I want," he said, "I'll make sure Ethan finds out. I'll twist the story so you look like the villain." I felt like a pawn in a cruel game, my life spiraling out of control. But deep within me, a spark of defiance began to grow. I realized that the only way to break free was to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, I sat Ethan down and told him everything. Every word felt like a knife cutting through the air, the weight of my confession suffocating. He listened in stunned silence, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. When I finished, there was a long pause before he finally spoke. "I need to talk to my father," he said, his voice shaking. What happened next is a story for another time, but I will say this. Speaking out was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most liberating. The truth had been my prison, but it also became my salvation. And while the scars of that experience remain, they serve as a reminder of my strength and resilience. Life doesn't always go as planned, and sometimes the people we trust the most can betray us in unimaginable ways. But even in the darkest moments, there's a glimmer of hope, a chance to reclaim your power and rewrite your story.